All righty. Richard, good to see you. Mantra community, always a pleasure. Let's give everyone just a little bit of time to filter in now that we started, but usually we do a little bit of a around the world check-in to see who's calling in and watching from where. The Mantra community is global on these community connects, and they are eagerly awaiting this one. I've already seen them chatting in our Telegram group, asking questions and excited about what's to come. We definitely have some interesting topics here with Richard, but let's see where everyone is calling in from. I've seen a couple familiar faces. I see Katie, she's always on. Katie, you're still in Turkey, right? Let's see who else. I see a Duster in Osaka, Turkey's here. Yeah, Katie's always here. She is an amazing detective and finds all things Mantra and Inveniam before anyone else. It is pretty crazy and impressive. Tony, I believe you're in Nigeria. Eraz, play, I'm not sure where you are. Hello to you. All righty. Well, let's get it started. Richard, great to be with you here today.
Yeah, likewise, JP. Always great to spend time with you.
Absolutely. So, Richard, we've known each other for closing up on a year. We met at the Agentic conference. I believe that was in the fall in Abu Dhabi that we hosted with Inveniam, and that was prior to you joining Inveniam, if I'm not mistaken. And you've had a please.
I visited. I was a guest of Pat's. Unbeknownst to me, it was a recruiting trip, and it worked.
There we go. Well, I was going to say, prior to officially joining, you've had a very illustrious career at Bain & Company, Deloitte Consulting, IBM, Bearing Point, and KPMG. Can you just introduce yourself, a little bit of your background, how you got into digital assets, and then also maybe aside from the Agentic conference recruiting trip, how did you find out about Inveniam and how did you kind of get involved?
Yeah, sure. That's a great way to get started, JP. Thanks. So, I was always interested in technology, and it seemed to come very easy to me. This is like PC days, LAN days. Think in the late 1980s, and I ended up joining a company as a systems analyst. Large defense contractor. And I found that the people that were having a disproportionate voice in the organization were from outside the organization. It was a consulting group. And, determined at that point, if I really wanted to have a voice and achieve full potential, I needed to get outside an organization and into, an organization that advises companies. So I joined KPMG in the early 90s, moved very quickly to senior levels of the organization. The group that I joined in the early 90s was called Strategic Services, and I was in the client server advisory group. And so it was the mainframe landscape and helping to set up more responsive networks and new compute infrastructure, helping departmental organizations to take advantage of new coding techniques. I was into object-oriented development, into different database architectures, and became a partner at KPMG in the late 90s. So after about 6 years in the organization. And at that time, when I became partner, I was running a group called Internet Business Solutions. And Internet Business Solutions focused on financial services. And I had experience design branding, digital strategy, was doing a lot around startups. And one interesting story, I landed a project with a consortium of banks, Citi, Chase, Deutsche, and Reuters. So there was like 3 banks and Reuters to create a new co called Atriax. And those 3 banks hired a guy they all knew named Dan Moorhead. Dan Moorhead was the CEO of Atriax, and he and I worked together to solidify the investment from the banks, to solidify the business strategy, to design the tech architecture. We helped to secure real estate at Canary Wharf, for the team. And I remember sitting with Dan at the first board meeting when Atriax launched in 2001. And the rest is history. It shut down 2 years later because I never got the volume of business expected, because the banks did not have the incentive to send the FX trading volume to the NewCo. So internet business solutions, and like I'll fast forward, from the early aughts, was doing a lot in startups, JVs, new business design, leveraging digital technology, and throughout my career, throughout the 30 years I spent in management consulting, it was always around technology innovation, technology disruption, and for financial services, it was tech strategy and innovation. And so it was inevitable that I would end up working with digital assets and blockchain
Yep.
because the global financial markets are going to re-platform onto a blockchain processing architecture. It's inevitable. There's no question. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of what's happening.
Richard, I'm going to cut you off for just a second. It's fading out a little bit. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Sound-wise. Oh, there we go. That was much better.
Okay,
Perfect.
great.
You just missed the last like 5 seconds. Just the last 5 seconds.
Yeah, I was just saying that it was inevitable that I would end up in digital assets and blockchain because, it is where financial markets is going to be. It's going to, the global financial markets will re-platform onto a blockchain processing architecture.
Yep.
And so I started the first blockchain project I did with digital assets was for a regional bank in the United States in 2016, so 10 years ago. And it was to create a tokenized rewards program. Ethereum had just launched. I subcontract. I was a partner at Deloitte at the time, senior partner there, and we subcontracted to Consensus to do the build. And we built out that platform along with some other innovative initiatives, including crowdsourcing to build a bank ambassador application and other things. So 10 years ago, got exposed to it, really got passionate about it, and ended up leading for Deloitte blockchain and digital assets consulting for financial services globally, and then moved to Bain & Company and led that practice there globally. It was called Web3 and digital assets. I left that business in mid 24, so 2 years ago, and went to an adjacent space. And the adjacent space was in the United States in particular, with the carpet bombing regime of Gary Gensler. How do I continue to innovate in digital assets without being under the constraints of a frozen banking market for anything blockchain? And I moved to carbon markets and tokenized carbon markets just to stay close by until there was clarity, not the Clarity Act, but clarity on the future came. And Pat O'Meara, who I met in 2020 when I was at Deloitte, I was introduced to him through networks, through conferences. Spent a fair bit of time with Pat and the leadership team then. And I introduced him to clients. I spoke at their user conference in 2021 in Miami. He reached out and said, hey brother, we've got a lot going on. I think it's time for you to join the team. And so when we met at the Agentic conference in Abu Dhabi, that was part of the recruiting trip. And it was, I was advanced in conversations, but that was really the closing meeting. So I live in Greenwich, Connecticut. I sail as a hobby in the summer. I ski as a hobby in the winter. I have 5 kids, and 4 of which are in college right now, 1 in high school. And I just love the space. I'm having so much fun with you and with Pat. And I can't believe the level of activity and engagement from the market that we're getting, and the way that the market's coming to us, because Inveniam IO has been around for 10 years, and I'll talk a bit about that. But it's great to be here, and it's great to be with the community.
Absolutely. No, we really appreciate it. And this has been an introduction to the Inveniam family and to the Inveniam ecosystem. And a few weeks back we did an X space with Albert and with Steve talking about Inveniam site. Now we're doing this conversation here together with you for Inveniam IO, which is obviously a very, very key pillar of the ecosystem. And we're going to have many more in the future. So I think this is something that the community can start looking forward to really understand what the ecosystem is comprised of, to understand the scale and the breadth of the offerings that we're bringing to market. And as you said, the market's actually meeting us now, which historically hasn't always been the case. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about Inveniam IO, its history, kind of what the future holds, and why you're so excited about it.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. So when Pat created Inveniam a decade ago, the core thesis was that in order for systematic trading of private market assets is a much bigger asset class than public markets, but they're highly illiquid. It's expensive to verify, the asset, to price it and have it, be marketable, in a way that makes it tradable. There was a lot of, challenges that he observed then. Some of those challenges still exist today, but, he had a vision 10 years ago to say, in order to have, systematic trading of private market assets, you need to have, information to price an asset at any time. And so this is, the foundation of, think of a real world asset. So if you have a token on a building, and there was really a lot of excitement then around, fractionalizing, buildings, like buy a piece of the Empire State Building or something. The challenge is the history of those assets, the cap table of those assets, the pricing of those assets, the provability of the underlying ownership stake. And so Inveniam IO was really created to capture all of that data, but do it in a decentralized manner so that you can be read where it's sat, so that data remains sovereign by the asset holder. And even then, what Inveniam IO did then, does now, is you permission into that enclave around the information for the private market asset. We read it, we index it, we now vector embed that for AI use. We create a hash against that so that we're able to know origin, state, and process, and then we anchor that hash on chain. And so, the chain becomes an attestation layer for the underlying, data, data set on an asset. And what's really interesting, JP, is, this vision of decentralized data, sovereign data, right? Even when we do the indexing and the vector embedding, we do that, in permissioned environments of the asset holder, on MongoDB or Weaviate, things like that. Our processing platform, it's all in memory. We don't write it, any of that data, so it doesn't leak. And, what we did then and what we continue to do today with regard to the processing architecture supports one of the biggest themes, in the market around AI. And I'll only talk about AI for just a moment, and then I'll tie that back to some of the other things that we're doing. The thinking now is that frontier models are using distillation to create new models like Kimi, open source, right? They're commoditizing very, very quickly, and so what's happening is value is moving down the stack from the model into the infrastructure and the data, up the stack into the application, and that the models themselves are going to be hot swappable. And large language, small language, multi-model, using different techniques, but the infrastructure for the data is of increasing importance, and the market is coming to us, and the things that are being said about what the market needs to be successful in this world of AI is a lot like what needed to be successful and continues to need to be successful or true for tokenized real world assets. And AI itself, to be trusted AI, needs those kind of trusted data attestations, proof of origin, process, and state to be able to execute autonomously. So thematically, we're supporting sovereign AI, autonomous capital, and we're supporting at the same time, blockchain digital assets and blockchain processing architecture and the sovereign control of data. Now, I've covered a lot of ground there, but for people that have been on Inveniam calls, there'll be no surprise, right? Anytime there's an Inveniam call, a lot of ground is covered.
Absolutely.
Simply, what's going on now with our platform and where we've come from is the processing architecture continues to be validated by the market themes and market demand. The sophistication of the platform continues to increase. The use of the platform continues to increase. And as we sit here today, we have 200 billion in private assets on the platform, and we've just signed our largest commercial agreement with a company in the commercial real estate space that has coverage for 6% of global commercial real estate, of total value of about $3.5 trillion. And I've just returned and just did a red eye and landed in Connecticut from San Diego. Been in San Diego the last couple of days with phenomenal teams there, the Inveniam team and our client team, really mapping out, what we're going to do between now and the end of the year to bring those assets and the information about those assets onto Inveniam as the core data control plane for that business. So the asset coverage is going to expand. The platform is going to continue to get stronger, and the use of attestations on chain, anchoring, on chain, is going to just explode.
It's amazing. I mean, the sheer scale of that is truly incredible. In crypto, you're not used to hearing trillion, and that really is how big this client is in the coverage of the assets that they work with. That's what private markets give you, and I think that's a really, really exciting proposition to be able to work with a client, credentialize all that data and then test it on chain. Very exciting. And I think I can see the community saying, "Oh my gosh, trillions! Did I hear that correctly?" One other thing I think is kind of a silly question, but it's an important one, from Liam. He's asking, "What's the difference between Inveniam and Inveniam.io?" So this is a bit more of a branding question. You said you had some branding background. Could you maybe just explain the simple difference between Inveniam.io and Inveniam? And maybe I'll lob you one there, and also you can throw in Inveniam chain too.
Yeah. So Inveniam is Latin for find a way. And, Inveniam is short for Inveniam Capital Partners, ICP. When we talk about Inveniam, it really is the top co or the hold co for different businesses. And Inveniam.io is a business under Inveniam Capital Partners. I know it's confusing because our URL is inveniam.io. And I've suggested, and I believe we'll be working on some clarity around branding and product positioning. But today, Inveniam Capital Partners is Topco, and in that there's Inveniam Capital, there's regulated entities in that. There are other holdings that we have. There are different acquisitions that we've made in the ICP Inveniam Capital Partner portfolio. But the one constant, the substrate right within the Inveniam family is Inveniam.io as the core processing architecture for sovereign data to enable used to be systematic trading of private market assets, but it really is to enable trusted attestation layer for AI and tokenization.
Amazing. So you did use the term autonomous capital previously. Could you maybe describe a little bit of what does that mean, and what are the kind of the financial activities that become possible once AI agents can act on this data and they know that it's trusted? Does that mean capital is going to be flowing automatically all over the world? What is the big picture behind this concept of autonomous capital?
Sure. What's really interesting is if you think about programmable money, or you think about some of the themes and design patterns that have emerged over the last decade, with innovation around DeFi and digital assets, is that you could imbue a set of programmable characteristics into an asset, and that's true. That's really interesting. But for complex multi-asset portfolio-based needs, there needs to be another layer to act on that autonomous capital. And I'll describe one example of how this is going to manifest.
Yep.
The way it's going to manifest is agentic capabilities are going to be designed around specific steps in workflow. Agentic orchestrators are going to weave together and control those steps in the workflow, and a set of guardrails and limits and actions will be provided through secure blockchain immutable rule sets. And the example that I like to use is in corporate treasury. So, corporate treasurer in a large organization at a multinational, will be setting on, different currencies, different liquid instruments, treasuries. We'll be, monitoring, yield curves, interest rates, FX rates, and with autonomous capital, that treasury function can be, an AI orchestrator, right, 24/7 that will watch moves in the market. Let's say, a conflict breaks out and, a commodity price spikes, and right there is, a change in, capital markets positions. An AI treasurer orchestrator will, monitor the portfolio and say, all right, we need to move out of one currency into another. We need to, buy an interest rate swap, right, as as protection against some of the moves. We need to, sell these treasuries, buy those treasuries. We need to move capital, from one jurisdiction to another, and all of those steps can be completed without human intervention. All those steps can be completed autonomously, so that the capital will move to where it's most productive. Favorite saying is capital goes to where it's treated well. And so being able to monitor that and to dynamically rebalance a portfolio for liquidity purposes at a corporation, instead of waiting till Monday morning when the market opens Eastern Daylight Time in the U.S. to be able to make those changes and to go to the banking rails and to have a wire or to move money from one country to another. All this will happen on blockchain with agents 24/7 autonomously. Now there's some regulatory action to enable that in Europe.
Sure.
A lot more needs to be done, but the ability to deliver on this is real.
Yep.
And the critical primitive for this to be able to be executed is the attestations for the information you're getting. So if you get information, an agent says what is the the yield curve, and it gets a response back. How do you say, well, how do I know this is true? Provide one agent to another agent. An agent can be, give me the attestation, right, against this yield curve, so that I can include that in my flow of execution and write that to a log that I'm executing this based on this information, which was verified from this chain and this attestation by that agent. And so there's full transparency of why something was done based on what information. And that just wasn't possible, heretofore. And we play a critical role in Inveniam.io and Inveniam chain in being able to support autonomous capital.
100%. I mean, I think this is a very good kind of summary at the end of that, to show why it's, some of the stuff seems really simple to people, but when you break it down, that attestation and that immutable kind of hash on chain is so critical in agentic use cases, just as we were explaining, but also, for example, when we talked with Albert on Inveniam site, and we were literally seeing that these AI agents are just making up case law and making up all sorts of things, and the AI can go haywire if it's not kept in check, and this this attestation and this immutability of a blockchain enables that checks and balances being put in place. I think that's super critical, and a great way to kind of to end on that point.
Well, let's not end.
Just one more comment. Oh, not end. Yeah, definitely not end. Let's go.
It's a community call. And that was really the catalyst behind working with you to launch Inveniam chain, right? That went live on mainnet on May 13th. It is designed specifically for agentic attestations, and to enable autonomous capital. And those attestations are backed up by information on Inveniam.io. So public chain where you have agents. And there's a demo that Albert has created where an agent on another chain, another layer one, is executing an orchestration plan and calls out to an agent sitting on Inveniam chain to say, give me the attestation against this price information, and it checks, right, the specific fields. It's not full disclosure, right? It's permissioned to go, and almost a zero knowledge proof to say, like, can you tell me if this price is right? And the answer back is yes. and that attestation then gets written. And so it has a native MCP server, right? It has, read-write characteristics, which are, the economics and the design of it are built for, agentic use. And the chain really brings, to the next level, the set of capabilities that Inveniam IO can provide.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think, having worked with you prior to being acquired, but just worked with you over the last few months, I mean, it really is great to see how all these things are very complementary. And you have, IO being a foundational layer for data attestation and agentic use cases. And then you have Inveniam chain being kind of the chain of choice where this is all going to get recorded. You have Inveniam markets, you have MF markets, which Stark had a really great question about what are some of the private markets we're going to see listed on MF markets with the launch. So all these things are really coming together, and just without giving away too much, we have a very exciting partnership for MF markets that we're going to be launching as one of the first private markets coming to market. And this is actually not even related to Inveniam IO. It's a third party, and I think you guys are going to be very excited. But just the capabilities and the access to unique data is critical through Inveniam IO for creating unique perp markets and also prediction markets for MF markets in the future. So all these things, you can see the reflexivity of how this goes around with each other. And I think that's one of the great things that Pat's helped build is how all these things are really quite complementary to each other.
Yeah. It's a pretty dynamic ecosystem, right? It's a pretty amazing opportunity, but it's an open ecosystem. It's so for the attestations we're talking about, Inveniam IO is a great underlying platform to secure decentralized information, right? And then write those attestations for agentic consumption as well as for use to confirm the underlying asset holdings for tokenized real world asset. But it's not the only way. And so we want as many attestations and underlying data sets to be anchored to Inveniam chain. We just think that Inveniam IO is the best operating system for data, the best control plane for data. And we hope people bring more data to it. And we're seeing JP, a lot of different use cases, a lot of different industry domains bringing data, right, that they want to secure for AI sovereignty, as well as for participation in on-chain attestation use, including logistics, including luxury, including insurance, including so many different domains. And it's not just real estate. We're big in real estate. It's one of our early investors. It's a real estate company. And we have a lot of private credit on our platform. So there's different, financial domains, but we're seeing that expand more generally for, purposes of companies wanting to be a part of the ecosystem, and we love it.
Amazing. It's really awesome to see. Maybe just getting a little bit more tactical. Can we talk about when a client decides that, hey, I need Inveniam IO for my data. I'm a private market asset owner. Currently, the systems that I'm using are complicated, potentially expensive, require a significant amount of manual intervention. When they say, hey, the switch flips in their head, I'm going to get Inveniam IO. I'm going to bring this into my, my business. What does that look like for them? Are they, sharing documents via SharePoint or Dropbox, or like how does it actually work functionally?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's pretty straightforward. I'll give you an example, of a real estate company that we recently onboarded for like appraisals. They wanted to, use our platform to, read, index, vector embed, hash, and anchor on chain appraisals for a well-known chain of franchises. And the way that happened is they permissioned us into their environment. In this case, it was a SharePoint environment, so they had all the appraisals in SharePoint. They permissioned us in. We use those credentials to connect to that data where it lives. We don't copy it. We then, did all of the stuff that I talked about as far as, read, index, vector, embed, hash, and anchor, and then provided back to them, right, all of those appraisals so that they could engage with them agentically, and ask about, market trends around, and talk about the, movements in particular markets and which markets are more attractive. If they were to rebalance portfolio, they're able to like engage the data in ways they haven't before. It took a week to do that. So from the time I said, permission us in your environment, connect to the environment, run the processes on information, provide the information back to the client, provided a dashboard so they could see the information, interact with the information. It was a week-long effort. And on our side, it was 2 people per time to set that up. So it's very lightweight. It's very non-invasive once permission in the environment, and we connect to the usual suspects of an S3 bucket or SharePoint or OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox. But we're also moving into, for GPs and LPs, permissioned data rooms for private assets, which is really an important area for our growth, to get access to, particularly GP assets, that we can then work with those GPs to provide a path to tokenization as a way for capital formation and ease of capital raising.
Amazing. I mean, I know that the clientele of Inveniam and Inveniam.io is significantly institutional. It covers a broad range of industries, as you mentioned. It's not just real estate and financial services, but particularly in those areas that require significant compliance oversight or auditing or regulatory guidance. How does Inveniam.io supplement that, support that, particularly financial services use cases that may have regulated nature or very sensitive data being involved? How does the product work with these type of solutions? And that's relevant for us because obviously, we have Mantra Finance and we have our VARA licensing. These are always very sensitive things that require, a lot of regulatory guidance and oversight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just step back and talk about blockchain generally for that purpose, and
Sure.
some work I was doing 10 years ago. The trust comes from transparency, and transparency can be provided on public chains, through various ledger scan technologies, and regulators will be able to look in and see what's moving where among what parties, particularly for whitelisted wallets, and to be able to surveil activities that to make sure they meet regulatory compliance. It's make some people in the DeFi space uncomfortable for the surveillance state, but let's just stick with being able to achieve regulatory compliance for institutions we serve. That the transaction is one thing. The underlying information about the transaction of what asset and what state, with what stake, all right, and what the overall cap table looks like, to be able to bring that forward, which we can, on a permission basis to regulators, really does ease the cost burden, the regulatory burden, and infuse trust to a regulator like VARA, so that they can see what's happening, right? In VARA they have their own surveillance on chain activity, but in what we're doing, to be able to see what's being offered, what's the state of that, who the cap table participants, is something that hasn't been able to be offered heretofore. And so as we bring data into Inveniam.io, a couple things happen, JP. One is, and this is true, and we're demoing this for some regulated banks, and not just demoing, we've created solutions or the implementation cycle, where we have agents embedded in the environment that do policy alignment, to make sure that what they're doing aligns with corporate policy as well as regulatory policy. And for any transactions executed, can apply that agentic policy against that control plane, and then provide that evidence, write that that attestation against the policy check, so that after the fact, when a regulator, comes in and said, what moved from who to who,
Yep.
right, for what purpose, under what rule set, like all that information is captured. And it's done dynamically at very low cost with very little interaction, and it can be persisted forever. And so it creates a much more controlled environmental matters too, and we'll talk about DGML for that maybe, but regulatory red eye,
Yeah.
a much more controlled regulatory compliance environment where you do the pre-auth, right, and the pre-capture of what right do I have to do what I'm doing, and how does it comply with the regime that I'm in before the transaction, versus after the fact having a regulator say, look back 2 years and try to rebuild, right, all of the artifacts to support that.
Yep.
Right, we're inverting that. We're doing all the work up front to make sure that any of our clients know that what they're doing complies with the regime that they're in.
Amazing. I mean, that's absolutely. I mean, I think it shows the kind of the usefulness of Inveniam IO and how it can really be applicable in many different use cases, including highly regulated ones and highly regulated environments. You mentioned things like logistics and luxury and whatnot, which I'm sure have some degree of regulation. All major industries do, but when you talk about financial use cases, it's highly regulated, and having that coverage is critically important. So I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's a non-starter if we can't show how, right, the activities will be able to align with the guardrails associated with a particular regime that a regulated entity is in.
Absolutely, 100%. Katie is saying this is one of the reasons why MF Markets requires KYC upfront. That is correct. Any platform that we're operating that seeks to be regulated is going to have some degree of KYC, and compliance is an important, critical part of that, and being able to offer that in a way that's also user friendly is important. I think Inveniam IO becomes a useful tool there too. So we've been at it for a bit, and I think we've painted a really good picture of Inveniam IO, the products, the users and the clients, and some of the use cases. If the community has any other questions that they want to ask, now is the time, because I'm going to ask you one very big forward-looking question, and then we'll try to get to some community questions as well before we wrap it up. So looking ahead 5 years or 10 years, however you want to frame it, what role do you expect Inveniam IO to play, both in the infrastructure of private markets as well as agentic finance and agentic use cases?
Super question.
It's a big question, yeah.
Yeah, 5 years. I expect Inveniam IO to be the standard for sovereign AI data management, where you have ZDR, zero data retention, where, right, every action, right, is captured for auditability and compliance, and it's going to Inveniam IO and the architecture that we're talking about here and the capabilities that we're bringing forward are going to finally unleash the growth in RWA, which has been predicted for maybe a decade, right? Everybody in the late teens was excited about, like, this is the exponential knee in growth on chain, right? We're going to have tokenized buildings, and it's going to be massive value, and it's going to create liquidity and transactional flows and new markets, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen because the building blocks didn't have the maturity, and all of the various building blocks weren't cohesively integrated. Pieces grew at a different pace. Where we sit today is we have all of the building blocks, and one of the essential building blocks, right, around the sovereign data and the control plane for that data, and to be able to connect a token to the underlying data information, including price discovery, and all the attributes, right, associated with it for use in the markets whether you want to use that token for collateral or you want to trade it. I think that Inveniam IO is going to really provide, and you're going to see the growth. Think about the time frame and all the pipeline we have now. There's going to be a breakout moment. I predict it'll be this year, and we're going to be there will be a steady growth over the next 5 years to move from, I said we had 200 billion on platform. We're going to have 3.7 trillion on platform by the end of the year. And I think that number can, 10x, over the next 5 years, because the infrastructure, the guardrails to deliver on the vision that we've all held for a number of years now is finally there. And with that trust, many of the private asset holders and market participants can jump in the pool now.
It's incredibly exciting. I mean, I think having been in the tokenization space for a long time, it has been a pipe dream in some regards. Everyone's saying that just by tokenizing things, you're going to have this magic liquidity and a massive amount of new users, and it's just not the case. And you do need to solve a problem when you tokenize something, and that can be an access problem, that can be a liquidity problem, and that can be a structural issue, it can be a data problem, and I think as we've touched on in this call in many ways, those things are being solved, and they're being solved right in front of our eyes, and we're working on many of the things that are hopefully solving those problems. So definitely a great way to end this part of the segment, and really appreciate your comments and your very deep dives on Inveniam IO. I think it was really helpful for the community. So there's some great questions from everyone. So let's just maybe highlight a couple of them. Liam had another great one. Is it possible to share any experiences with and feedback you've gotten from large institutional clients? Most of retail doesn't really know their needs and how they think.
Feedback from large institutional clients. I'll tell you just a quick backcast to early conversations, the conversation we're having now. The traction that we've been able to get over the past 5 years was always constrained by a market narrative of bring your data here to support tokenization. And companies say, well, I'm not sure I want to tokenize. Why would I do that unless I'm sure I want to tokenize? And what I want to tokenize and why I want to tokenize. And let's call it 6-8 years ago. On the way to the tokenization party, we had the chat GPT moment in November of 2022. And now the conversations with institutions look something like this. I want to make my data AI ready, but I don't want to put it out there for everybody to use. I want to lose control of it. I don't want it to be used for training other people's models. I don't want it to inform different transactional theses. And so talking to many institutional companies about being the AI sovereign data control plane, with the added benefit that once you have that data on Inveniam IO, it's an easy flip to tokenization. So tokenization is now a secondary benefit, with AI ready being the primary benefit. And that's what large institutions are seeing, because they're all trying to get their data AI ready. And let's talk just a minute for what AI ready means and why DGML matters. DGML is the document graph markup language. We had an announcement. When was it, JP? Was it last week?
Yeah, I believe it was last week.
It was last week, where we worked with Dokugami to move DGML forward as an open standard and open source on GitHub. It's dgml.io. And it's really important to what we're doing at Inveniam IO. And the reason we pushed this forward was because we have been doing things similar to what DGML does since our inception, but it's all been template based. So you need to have a template to be able to describe a document and then pull that document based on the template to extract information from let's say a lease agreement. And the lease agreement, we would look for lease term, rental rate, renewal options, default clause, and a 200-page document. And we would use a template to do that. And so we would say, well, we've got 20 document templates. What DGML does is it does dynamic discovery of an ontology based on a doc set with as few as 5 documents, and it pre-processes those documents with an open source expression of the Merkle tree, into the various fields in that document. Why does that matter? It matters because the documents that are used by AI today are not designed for AI consumption, not designed for machine consumption, it's designed for human consumption. I've heard stats that something like 85% of the data in the world lives in unstructured document data. And so what you're seeing right now with token consumption, with energy use, is really being driven by frontier models going and accessing a 200-page document and reading it for context and reading it again and figuring out what they're looking for and going to look at the renewal rate options. So they're reading these documents top to bottom every time, using power, using tokens, and getting different results. Because one frontier model might get different context and different information from the same document. DGML pre-processes that, and the LLMs hit the DGML Merkle tree against that document, so you can find much more quickly with fewer reads, lower token consumption, up to 10x fewer tokens, right? The data that you need, and that data, then becomes far more valuable for organizations. So what are we hearing from institutions? We're hearing, help me to take my data, make it AI ready by processing it through DGML, create the control structure like the file system against that DGML documents in Inveniam IO, do that while leaving my documents in place. These are the operational documents. These are not, take a copy and then becomes decoupled from the actual, ground truth. And so you close the ecosystem gaps and you create the architecture for, AI enablement with tokenization as an option. That option gets called in short order, that 5-year window. As those options get called and those assets move from just the capture and the indexing and the vector embedding of that data, but to be able to bring all that data in a digital format forward for trading activity, that's when it all happens. And so that's the sale to institutions now in the conversation we're having. AI ready now, tokenization later, but the attributes that we're able to bring, and I'd offer one more comment. We're very much like a Palantir. So Palantir is bringing a proprietary ontology to organize the doc set in organizations. We bring open source ability to dynamically understand an individual ontology in an organization and then take that forward. It's a much better architecture for the future. Open source, open standard, and maximal optionality against the underlying data set.
Awesome. I love it. I have another question I actually don't know the answer to this one. From Stark Explorer. When an agent acts on verified data and still gets it wrong, who is accountable?
Well, I'm not sure I've played that out, right? And it's a great question. When an agent acts on verified data and still gets it wrong, I say, well, what did it get wrong? I think that the answer to that, and there was a lot of talk about this at Consensus, and we held a panel, on this. The ultimate responsibility still lies with a human. So, if there's an agent that's operating on the behalf of a trader that executes a trade which, is, not permissible or was done incorrectly, right, that accountability falls on the trader to whom that agent is assigned. And so you'll see in organizations and large financial institutions that are using agents, you have one human attached to multiple agents, but you don't have multiple humans connected to one agent because you break the accountability chain of custody. And the reason that we talk about the importance of attestation and rule sets and guardrails being anchored on blockchain is the transparency and the immutability of those rule sets and guardrails. And the limits that are being used now are sufficiently low to be able to learn and to test and to execute in this environment with, limited, attack surface, right? If there is a fail, and then that will expand. But the bottom line is, if an agent gets something wrong, the agent's not accountable. The person on behalf of the person who that agent's acting on behalf of is the accountable party.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, there isn't exactly an AI jail at this stage. So,
if there were, they might.
Anyway, yeah, exactly. That was a very good question, though. So thank you, Stark Explorer. You've had a couple good ones. There's been a couple of people asking this particular question, so we'll end it here because Katie had another question about how did the Inveniam tokenomics call go when I couldn't make the Inveniam site X space. We actually have another Inveniam tokenomics call right after this, so we need to leave a few minutes in between to make sure we get to that one. So this will be the last question, and then I think they're very interested in knowing more about you, Richard. So Katie's asking, where is the best place to follow you, LinkedIn or X? Or both?
Yeah, both. RK Walker 67 on X, and I think that my LinkedIn is just Richard K. Walker. I have to say there's no 67 on that, but LinkedIn is good. It's usually pretty fresh, increasingly active on X as well.
Amazing. Alrighty, well, Richard, it was an absolute pleasure. I think the community really enjoyed it. There was a lot of really, really good information in there.
Awesome.
Inveniam.io was a core piece of the Inveniam Foundation, and it will also be a really critical ally and partner to what we're trying to build at Inveniam chain as well. So I'm really happy to be able to introduce you to the Mantra community officially. And Mantra community, please give Richard a thank you. And please give him a follow on X and on LinkedIn.
And I'll post more I'll post more, Katie.
Amazing. Awesome.
Thanks, JP. I appreciate it. It's great. We love the Mantra community. Love what you're doing. Love that you're joining the family. The great things ahead. So this has really been a privilege. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day wherever you are in the world.
Bye.
Bye-bye.